Welcome back, ladies and gentlemen. We've got another week of cracking open classic theme decks and trying to make something relatively competitively viable out of them. Unfortunately, we're not going to be breaking our streak of classic Kanto nostalgia baiting, because this week I got my hands on a pair of Mewtwo theme decks. These two are actually courtesy of my lovely girlfriend, who drove in the middle of a storm to help me pick these up in a weird back alley game shop. Interesting experience, but very worth it, and kudos to her because these things were almost impossible to find. I'm surprised that I didn't get scalped on them, because theme decks these days seem to come at a premium. But luckily, managed to get my hands on these guys for a good rate so that I could crack them open and show you guys what we can make. So I'm a little interested, actually, because this is the first time I've seen a theme deck that lists two types on it. The Charizard theme deck that we opened did have a grass and fire kind of thing going on, but they marketed it only as a fire type deck, which makes sense because there were no grass energy, I guess. But I don't know, it's kind of nice. They're literally saying that, like, hey, this thing plays as a dual type deck, which is really interesting. So I'm keen to crack this open and see what we've got. Yeah, I don't know, should be fun. It'll be different. This one's a little older, coming from Unbroken Bonds. It was paired alongside a Zeraora theme deck that I thought about doing for this episode for a long time, and then promptly realized, like, it's not gonna work. So so this is what we're working with. Let me crack one of these bad boys open and we'll see what we've got inside. Okay, oh, very nice little Mewtwo coin. I'm enjoying adding these to my collection. A horrendously warped hollow cracked ice Mewtwo with the Mind Report ability that lets you put a supporter on top of your deck when you play this from your hand to the bench, and then Psyshock, which is 1 psychic and 2 colorless for 70 damage, unaffected by anything on your opponent's active Pokemon, which is meh for 3. But anyway, put that guy aside. And then, of course, we have the actual deck itself. So let's see what we have in here. And right up front, there's your fire energy. Okay, we got Torcat, Lily. There's our first psychic, Fisherman. Oh, a lot of this is going to be is going to have rotated already, so we'll have to make 2. Incineroar, which I guess is the second boss monster of the deck. And we have a Welder. Okay, I see what's going on here now. Oh, Salazzle. Okay, that's interesting. There we go. So, I mean, obviously this is going to have to be some kind of Welder deck, and I want to stay true to the theme of Mewtwo over here. So I've got an idea, actually. It's a little out, well, maybe not a little out there, but I've got a good idea of what I want to do with this kind of psychic Mewtwo Welder kind of thing they've got going on here. So let me hop on over to PTCGO. I think I'm going to have to make a couple serious trades and part with some very precious packs. But if I'm right, we're going to have a very interesting deck on the other side of this. So yep, let me go away for a little bit and see what we can do to make our boy Mewtwo here as competitive as possible. Okay, so this theme deck really doesn't give me much choice in terms of how I want to upgrade it. The combination of Mewtwo with Welder, it kind of leads to an inescapable conclusion. This is basically your stepping stone to Mewtwo Welder Box. This theme deck essentially prophesied the coming of one of the most powerful decks in the format then and even now, and I think they completely did it by accident. But since this is a theme deck upgrade, it's not really fair of me to expect that you can just splash in a playset of Mew Mews and a buffet of GX Pokemon, so a bit more restraint is necessary here. So to that end, I've built this upgraded theme deck under the assumption that you can afford to trade for one Mew Mew, or you got lucky pulling one from a pack of Unified Minds, like I did. So starting with that one copy of Mewtwo and Mew Tag Team GX, this card is flexibility incarnate. Its perfection ability allows you to copy the attack of any GX Pokemon on your bench or in your discard pile, as long as you have the energy for the attack you're copying. This is fantastic. This ability has allowed Mewtwo to essentially slot itself into any deck that can easily accelerate energy. I mean, there's Welder Mewtwo, there's Moist Mewtwo, and now people are experimenting with Lightning Mewtwo and Grass Mewtwo. It's literally that good of a card. But obviously, you need a few other GX Pokemon in the deck to make this work, and we have to ask, which attackers can we afford to include in this theme deck upgrade? Well, I've taken the budget approach here too, allowing myself just 2 GX attackers on either side of the Fire and Psychic split that was kind of built into this theme deck. And pretty much all of these GX Pokemon are easily accessible, either through products like promo boxes, tins, things like that, or as ladder rewards, or they're easy enough to trade, maybe they cost a pack or two. That was my criteria. So we'll start with the Fire GXs, both of which are Charizard tag teams because obviously Mewtwo and Mew is not enough nostalgia baiting for this deck. Reshiram and Charizard is pure firepower. The Twin Dragons are there basically for explosive power and for the ability to strike back with outrage. This is a solid secondary attacker because, newsflash, your single copy of Mew Mew can't carry the entire game on its own, so it's nice to have a beefy, threatening card like this, to back Mew Mew up. The next Charizard tag team is Charizard Braixen GX. This one can hit pretty hard as well, but what's interesting about this card is that its main attack rewards you with the ability to search for any 3 cards from your deck. So, as long as you don't get hit with a Marnie or Reset Stamp the following turn, you can basically stack your hand and set yourself up for next turn to further press your advantage. On the Psychic side, we'll start with the status-inflicting machine known as Muk Alolan Muk GX. This big, beefy Psychic attacker can inflict pretty severe poison on the regular, grinding opponents down and forcing a lot of desperate switches. It also has a particularly nasty GX attack that, for no energy if you so choose it, can poison and paralyze, and if you have the extra energy, can afflict the target with 150 points of passive damage every turn. Gengar Mimikyu GX is a different kind of debilitating. You play this almost exclusively for its GX attack, which prevents your opponent from playing any cards for 1 turn, all for the cost of 1 psychic energy. Now, they can still attack and use any effects on the board, but usually when you use this, it'll clinch you the game by allowing you to gain back precious momentum, or just run away with the game if you are already. And as for the rest of our Pokemon, they're there mostly for support. Dedenne GX is the obvious auto-include for draw power, and I've also kept the 1/1 Salazzle line for that extra bit of OG theme deck draw power. The Mewtwo from the theme deck is here to help recycle Welder over and over again, and if it comes up, yes, attack in a pinch. But, just use it for the ability, okay? Galarian Zigzagoon is there to help fix the math on certain attacks. For example, Reshizard's Flare Strike hits for 230, but a lot of tag teams sit at 240, so the Zigzagoon ping fixes that for us. And finally, I have this sneaky little Marshadow, which, like Mew Mew, can copy attacks. With the Psychic Energy and 2 colorless that are easily backed up with Welder, you can take out Zacian with its own Brave Blade, smack ADP with its own Ultimate Ray, and charge up your own teammates if you like. The possibilities are endless. You just can't use GX attacks, so that's something to keep in mind. But hey, it's a fun little tech to punish your opponents for using big attackers, and more often than not, you can really use it to set yourself up for some really interesting game states. On to the trainers, we've got a pretty standard supporter line for a Welder deck. Unlike the stingy theme deck, we're running a full playset of Welder, because this is your draw power and your energy acceleration all in one, so ideally, you want to see this card every turn. Boss's Orders is there to gust, and I have included a one-off Professor's Research just for a bit of emergency draw power, on the turns that you don't have access to Welder anyway. We have a lot of consistency cards here too. Pokegear and Energy Spinner help us get resources in hand, critically Welders and Fire Energies, and Giant Hearth is also there to help grab those Fire Energies, while helping us dump GXs that we don't want on board, and obviously give us access to their attacks through Mewtwo's ability. I have a pair of Big Charms in here because most of our GX Pokemon are big beefy boys, and so with the Big Charm attached, they can actually live a max power hit from Eternatus VMAX, which is extremely relevant in this meta. Reset Stamp is here mostly to gimp the opponent in the late game, especially if you have access to Muk's status effect, or if you use Gengar's GX attack, for example. Basically, if you can trap something in the active and then smack your opponent with a Reset Stamp, you are putting them in a very awkward spot. It's happened to me plenty of times. I can tell you, being on the receiving end of it usually makes you want to throw in the towel. And really the only other thing you need to know about is the ball search. I tested a lot of budget options, Great Ball, Pokecom, that kind of stuff. But ultimately, if you're playing a Mew deck, you need Cherish Ball. You just can't get by on Quick Ball alone, and so honestly, if you're going to invest in a few good trades, make sure that a playset of these is high up on your priorities of things to trade for. Plus, they are a good investment because as long as GX cards are still legal, they are a free search for GX cards, i.e. Dedenne, which is in almost every deck, so something to keep in mind. Oh, and energy. Obviously, we need a few Psychic Energies and a lot of Fire Energy to make this deck run, so we've got it there. It's a higher count than I would usually put in for a Mewtwo Welder deck, but I have that higher count, A, because we are going to be using some of those backup attackers, and B, because Salazzle needs to discard Fire Energy in order to use its effect to draw. So, slightly higher count, hopefully it doesn't bite us in the butt too much. And that definitely wraps up this monster of a deck profile. It's a little bit more intricate or complicated than my usual theme deck upgrades, but it's kind of warranted in this case. This kind of upgrade is really a case of compromising and building around what you have, and what you have here is a very interesting boss monster that requires a lot of support to make it work. So yeah, this isn't going to be one of those deck profiles where everything is almost 2 lines. Sorry. Now, will this Frankenstein of a Mewtwo Welder deck work? Well, let's jump into some games and find out. Well, this first game pits my Mewtwo Welder deck against an old friend in Pikarom. I was really curious to see how this matchup would play out because my experience playing against Mewtwo decks as a Pikarom player was that of trying to grind it out against the very bulky Mewtwo's while they confounded me with an astonishing array of attacks. Admittedly, Mewtwo was a match I feared almost as much as ADP or Eternatus, so I was really curious to see if I would actually have the advantage here. Now, one thing that this deck has on Pikarom is, as I'd mentioned, the ability to grind the game out. Almost all of my GX attackers are thick boys, and I have plenty of options to frustrate my opponent's attempt to full blitz. The game, however, started in a less than ideal situation for both of us, with Marshadow leading against a stranded Raichu. For my opponent, this would mean they would have to evacuate the rats before they could start setting up, and for me, it left me with one attack to copy, and it was an attack that would be a 4-hit KO at best on the opposing Pokemon. What I had to do was apply pressure and threaten big damage with the Marshadow. There was no way my opponent was getting off a full blitz right away, and if they brought in Pikarom before it was fully charged up, I could very easily chunk it with my Marshadow. Now, me personally, I didn't care much about losing Marshadow because it gives up a single prize, so I was really happy to charge it up, and this kinda ended up working out because I could gust up one of the opposing Pikarom and start smashing it with its own full blitz. Though, sadly, I couldn't accelerate any energy with the attack's effect because we don't play any lightning energy. Things went well enough that I was actually able to take the KO on Pikarom with Marshadow, which meant that the little creep paid for itself, and even if it was knocked out, I could swallow the considerable loss of energy. I mean, at that point, the game would come down to trying to either clean up the Raichus or smash whatever backup attackers my opponent would send out. I did lose Marshadow to the Raichus eventually, and this left me in an awkward spot because suddenly I didn't have any backup attackers ready. This tends to happen for Mew decks, especially ones that are very aggressively dumping their GXs early on in the game. So for me, at this point, I didn't really have anything to hold the line. Like, things got so bad, I was actually forced to power up one of the basic Mewtwo's and have it attack, which, yes, was funny, but, in the long run maybe proved a little useful because it was a cheap body that I could use to chip away at things, at least until I powered up another Mewtwo, but still, it was valuable time and ground lost. Now, I actually lost enough ground that my opponent was able to start charging up another Pikarom and got this close to firing off another full blitz. And while this wouldn't necessarily be game ending, it would make things extremely difficult. But I had options, and so long as I had a single Psychic Energy on Mew, I knew I could hold the line. Now, if you have access to Gengar and Mimikyu GX, then you can really frustrate Pikarom players by freezing them the turn before they can actually full blitz. I know because this happened to me on more than one occasion when I was doing the sealed only series. Even though you aren't doing any damage, you are able to give yourself another turn to build up enough energy to threaten a massive attack, or start laying out some contingencies for when the full blitz eventually goes off. So, for me, when my opponent was about to attach that third energy, I finally had the Mew Mew ready to go, and I popped the Horror House GX to freeze my opponent. Now, they couldn't get off the full blitz, and that gave me a turn to sting Pikarom and get it ready for a follow-up KO. And because my opponent really had to go for the full blitz, they had no choice but to attack into me, and since they couldn't muscle through my Mew Mew, it meant that I could easily take a KO using Reshizard's Outrage. And from our greatest friend to our greatest foe, the next match pits Mew Mew against the big bad ADP-Z. This was not a matchup I was looking for because I just don't have the resources to mount a fast enough assault on ADP, and really, it's ADP. The best of decks have a hard enough time against it, and here I am working with a theme deck upgrade. So I was not confident going into this game. But I did have a few things going in my favor, most notably the healthy HP stats of most of my GX attackers. Barring a Zigzagoon ping or a Vitality Band, Zacian couldn't KO any of them even after an Altered Creation, except for Gengar and Mimikyu. Add a Big Charm into the mix, and I can live just about anything at least once. And I could also count on the fact that half of my deck is fire, which makes that Sword Doggo very sad indeed. Now, this game actually demonstrated how important it is for a budget deck like this to have multiple attackers ready to go. If I tried to rely on Mew Mew for this game, I would have lost. But thankfully, I led the second most powerful attacker in the deck, Reshizard. And this put some serious pressure on my opponent, with the power to annihilate both Zacian V and ADP if I could get enough energy on board. And I'm a Welder deck. I can get enough energy on board. For my opponent, getting off Altered Creation would be the top priority, and in situations where the incredibly consistent ADP can't get what it needs, that creates the opportunity that most decks need to snatch victory from the jaws of defeat. But even then, it's going to be a hard-fought battle. In this case, my opponent had the water energy, but not the metal energy, so they had to pass, giving me an extra turn to lay down some very necessary chip damage on ADP. I was able to get a nice 30 damage poke from Reshizard using Outrage, and while I would have preferred to use the full 230 from Flare Strike, I had to make do. Now, my opponent would have to weigh their options because I could very easily blow up either ADP or Zacian depending on which supporter I would draw into next, right? Your ADP is damaged at this point. Is it really worth it to go for the Altered Creation, or do you just bring in Zacian and start swinging? My opponent, as ADP players do, decided to pursue the Altered Creation anyway, which would then give my Reshizard another turn to attack unopposed. The game really swung in my favor when I got my hands on the boss's orders, which meant that I could take out Zacian V before it would ever charge up, and that meant my opponent would have to rely on ADP as a backup attacker. Now, ADP, to its credit, is a fantastic comeback machine because its ultimate Ray attack basically lets you set up anything that requires 3 energy, so my opponent still could have very well charged up another Zacian and ruined my fun, right? You never want to assume that you're terribly ahead the moment you knock out ADP because, once Altered Creation gets off, they're doing enough damage to probably take out your attacker anyway, and if you can't KO ADP after it uses Altered Creation, then you're just going to lose ground slowly as they boss up and take out your guys. But in my case, thanks to all the consistency boosters I had access to, I was able to grab the crucial Welder and with a gigantic Double Blaze GX, blow up ADP, leaving my opponent with very few options, and thus clinching the game. Which is kind of nuts considering the fact that I never had to use Mew Mew once. But there it is. And there we go, ladies and gentlemen. Surprisingly, this freaky Mewtwo Welder deck actually pulled through against some pretty serious opponents. I think it's a testament to the really fantastic core that the theme deck provided, which, I know I keep saying it, was a totally accidental precursor to the actual Mewtwo Welder Box, which, is still a top tier deck to this day, so really, kudos to the designers for whipping this one up. Now, of course, your mileage will vary on a theme deck upgrade like this, because it all depends on which GX attackers you can actually pull from packs, snag in lucky trades, get from tins, that kind of thing. But still, the foundation is here, and I think you can really start to snowball your successes and build a stronger and stronger deck as you go, right? You might be starting out with 1 or 2 GX attackers to back up Mewtwo, but you win a couple of games, you get another one from a ladder reward, or you pull a lucky one from a pack, you fold that into your deck, and rinse and repeat. Like, I really can't say it enough. This is one of those times where I have to commend the designers of the card game for putting together such a nice package, especially compared to some of the more recent fare out of the theme decks. This is fantastic, I would really like to see more of these dual type decks built around a coherent strategy. I don't think they really tried that again since this deck came out. I guess you could say maybe with the exception of the Leon Charizard deck, which included, I think, the Yan Mega line as backup attackers. But, they didn't really support the deck's actual game plan, so I'm not really going to count that. Seriously, I think if we see more creativity in theme deck building like with this one here, then it's probably a good indication that the game as a whole is in a much better place. You're not thinking too little of the players starting out, and you're giving them just enough of a leg up that they're able to compete right away. And of course, with all the limitations of building around a theme deck, yeah, you can't include like a 4/4 line of something crazy, but if you can give them like a 2/2 line, or just a pair of 2 really good cards and build a nice strategy around it, I still think that's more than enough to get people started, especially on the lower rungs of the ladder. So, hey, if you happen to spot one of these at your local game shop or collecting dust at a Walmart or something like that, grab it. I have no problem saying that this deck is a really good investment for anyone looking to start the game, or, if you need a bit of a palate cleanser, you're tired of playing Eternatus VMAX or ADPZ and you kind of want to go back to basics, this is a fantastic place to start. It definitely gets my stamp of approval. And that'll about wrap it up for this week. You guys know the drill by now. Like the video, leave a comment, and subscribe if you haven't already. Good news is we're closing in on that 100 subscriber milestone, and that means we're that much closer to me releasing something very special for you guys. And I hope that we can reach that milestone right before Christmas because, it'd just be too perfect. Now, speaking of Christmas, despite the lockdown, my lady and I have quite a bit to get done for Christmas, so unfortunately there won't be a full-on episode next week, but I'll make sure you guys have something to whet your appetites and kind of tide you over until the episode I release before Christmas. And in the meantime, please leave more recommendations for theme decks, and maybe some rogue decks you'd like to see me cover in the future. I'm trying as much as possible to show some love for my local game shops and comic shops while I'm doing my last-minute Christmas shopping, whether that's ordering online or doing curbside. And, hey, it's a good excuse for me to grab a lot of Pokemon goodness and make more episodes. So, yeah, please send recommendations. And, yeah, that's about it. So, I'll see you all very soon, and until next time, take it easy.